The Miller house in Portland, Maine, looked like a timeless treasure. Its tall windows reflected the morning light, the brick walls held decades of memories, and the wooden staircase carried the weight of countless footsteps. Caroline Miller, 38 years old, paused for a moment at the kitchen counter, listening to the creak of the hallway floorboards above her. To anyone else, those imperfections were signs of age, but to her, they were pieces of a story she had come to cherish. "Mommy, look, the clouds are making animals," 6-year-old Sophie called from the living room window, her small hands pressed against the glass as if she could reach the sky itself. Caroline smiled. Sophie's imagination was like a stream that never stopped flowing. Every morning brought a new adventure, a new picture painted in her mind. Caroline poured orange juice into a glass and called her back to the table. Breakfast at the Miller house looked ordinary, yet something felt slightly off. Daniel Miller, Caroline's husband, came down the stairs with his usual polished appearance. He was 40 tall, handsome, and always careful about how others saw him. With colleagues and neighbors, his charm was magnetic. At home, however, there were moments when his smile did not reach his eyes. "I have an important meeting this weekend," Daniel said as he ruffled Sophie's hair. "If it goes well, it could change everything for us. Daddy will bring you a special gift, I promise." Sophie's eyes lit up with hope. Caroline kept quiet. There was something in Daniel's tone she could not shake. He had been different these past few months, ever since Caroline's mother had passed away and left her a large inheritance. The grief was still raw, yet her husband's restlessness seemed sharper than grief. Evelyn Miller, Caroline's mother-in-law, added another layer of tension. She often called unannounced, reminding Caroline that she would be visiting soon. Evelyn presented herself as gracious and elegant, but Caroline knew the truth. Evelyn saw Caroline as inadequate, never quite worthy of her son. With Sophie, her affection came with conditions, expecting the child to behave more like a miniature adult than a carefree little girl. That morning carried all of these unspoken threads. Caroline tried to focus on Sophie's laughter, but her mind was unsettled. She felt the presence of shadows she could not name. The Miller family seemed picture perfect from the outside, but within its walls, a quiet storm was beginning to gather. The following days carried a rhythm that felt both familiar and uneasy. Caroline busied herself with preparations for an upcoming exhibition at the Portland Art Museum, a project she had dreamed of for years. It focused on forgotten female artists of the 20th century, women whose work had been overlooked or dismissed. Caroline poured her energy into it, telling herself that dedication to art would ground her. Yet in the quiet of the house, shadows lingered. Sophie, with her endless curiosity, often drifted into Caroline's study while she worked. One afternoon, the little girl held up an old photograph she had found in a box of belongings. "Mommy, is this Grandma?" she asked. Caroline looked at the faded picture of herself as a child, standing beside her late mother. Her chest tightened. "Yes, sweetheart. That was Grandma when she was younger." Sophie nodded, but then whispered as if protecting a secret. "Grandma talks to me sometimes. She says I should be careful." Caroline tried to laugh it off. Children often blurred dreams with memories, and Sophie's imagination was famously vivid, but the words planted themselves in Caroline's mind, growing heavier with each passing day. The tension deepened when Sophie quietly confessed one evening, "Mommy, I saw Daddy on the phone with Grandma Evelyn. They were whispering. Daddy said you would not notice." Caroline paused. Daniel did take countless work calls, often in hushed tones. Still, there was something about the seriousness in Sophie's eyes that made Caroline uneasy. She brushed her daughter's hair gently and replied, "Sometimes adults keep secrets for work, but thank you for telling me." Even as she reassured Sophie, a wave of doubt crept into her heart. Late one night, when Daniel claimed he had gone to bed early, Caroline walked past his study. The door, usually locked, was slightly ajar. Inside, files were stacked neatly, but one drawer remained open. Her eyes fell on a folder marked life insurance. Her hands trembled as she scanned the documents. Just 1 week after her mother's funeral, Daniel had taken out a high-value policy in Caroline's name. The beneficiary was Daniel himself. The air felt suddenly heavy, her pulse quickening. She set the documents back as carefully as possible, forcing the drawer shut. Her mind raced. Why now? Why so soon after the inheritance? She tried to rationalize perhaps Daniel was being cautious, providing financial security, but something about the timing felt chilling. The next morning, Sophie lingered by the window again. "Mommy, I dreamed about the basement," she whispered. Caroline froze. The old servant's basement, sealed off decades ago, had only been mentioned once in the property report. She had never spoken of it to Sophie. "What basement?" Caroline asked cautiously. "The one with a secret room. It's for hiding when bad people come," Sophie answered with complete seriousness. Caroline forced a smile, but her chest tightened. Dreams or warnings? The line between the two was becoming dangerously thin. Friday evening arrived with a heaviness that clung to the walls. Daniel had kissed Sophie on the forehead before leaving the house with his suitcase, insisting that his business trip could not wait. Caroline had nodded, though the knot in her stomach grew tighter. After he left, she found herself walking from room to room, touching furniture, opening and closing doors, as if checking whether the house was still truly hers. Later that night, while Sophie colored pictures in the living room, Caroline noticed movement outside the window. A man in a dark coat walked slowly along the edge of the property. He paused near the garage, then circled toward the backyard. Caroline's breath caught. She quickly closed the curtains and pulled Sophie close. "We will stay inside tonight," she said, forcing a smile, but inside, unease spread like cold water. When Sophie went to bed, she begged, "Mommy, can I sleep in your room?" Caroline hesitated, then agreed. The child clung to her stuffed rabbit as if it carried all her courage. Caroline kissed her goodnight, trying to ignore the echo of her daughter's earlier words, "Daddy and Grandma are planning something bad." Sometime past midnight, Caroline stirred awake. A faint chemical smell seeped through the cracks of the window. Her throat prickled. She sat up sharply. Gasoline, heart racing, she crept downstairs to check the doors. When she reached for the back door handle, it refused to turn. Panic rose. She tried the side door, then the front. Every one was locked tight from the outside. A mechanical hum followed, and metal shutters descended over the windows, sealing them in silence. Smoke began to creep beneath the kitchen door. Sophie, awakened by the noise, appeared at the top of the stairs, clutching her rabbit. "Mommy," she whispered, trembling, "we need to escape right now." Caroline's chest tightened. "What do you mean? Where can we go?" Sophie's voice shook but carried conviction. "Behind the pantry. Grandma told me in a dream." The smell of smoke thickened, and faint crackling sounds grew louder. Caroline grabbed her daughter's hand and ran to the pantry. At first glance, it was just a small closet filled with shelves of canned goods and flour jars. Sophie pushed aside the lower shelf and pointed. "Here." Caroline knelt and found a wooden panel. She pulled hard. It creaked open, revealing darkness. "Go, sweetheart," Caroline urged. Sophie crawled inside first, the stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm. Caroline followed, pulling the panel closed behind them. The narrow passage smelled of dust and earth, cobwebs brushing against their faces. Caroline's heart pounded as smoke seeped faintly into the tunnel. "Where does this lead?" she whispered. "To the garden shed," Sophie replied calmly. "Grandma showed me." They crouched and crawled through the darkness, guided only by a sliver of light far ahead. Behind them, a loud thud shook the walls, followed by the roar of fire-consuming wood. The heat seemed to chase them forward. Caroline whispered prayers under her breath, forcing her body to keep moving. Sophie never looked back, her small steps sure and determined. At last they reached a rusted door. Caroline shoved it open, and fresh air burst in. They emerged into the cool night inside the shed. Caroline lifted Sophie and stumbled out into the yard. Behind them, flames had already devoured the house. Black smoke twisted into the sky, and the glow of fire painted the neighborhood in a sinister red. Sirens wailed in the distance. Sophie tugged her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, let's go to Miss Barbara's house," she urged, naming the neighbor 2 doors down. Caroline held her close, her eyes filling with tears. "You saved us," she whispered. Sophie looked up, her gaze steady. Grandma was watching. She knew Daddy's plan. Caroline trembled at the words, but she did not argue. Holding Sophie tightly, she ran toward Barbara's porch. When the neighbor opened the door, Caroline and Sophie stood covered in soot, their faces pale with terror. "Please," Caroline gasped, "call the police. Daniel set the house on fire. He tried to kill us." Though almost impossible to believe, Barbara reached for the phone without hesitation. Outside, the blaze swallowed the home that once held their lives. By the time fire trucks arrived, the Miller home was beyond saving. Flames roared through the roof, and the structure groaned under the pressure of collapsing beams. Neighbors gathered at a distance, whispering in disbelief as firefighters battled the inferno. Caroline sat on Barbara's porch, holding Sophie close, both of them shivering despite the heat of the blaze. Her voice shook as she repeated to the officers what had happened. "This was not an accident. My husband planned this. He wanted us gone." The detective in charge, a gray-haired man named Lieutenant Harris, crouched down to her level. "Ma'am, that is a very serious accusation. Do you have anything that can support it?" Caroline pulled her phone from her pocket with trembling hands. On the screen were photographs she had taken the night before, images of the life insurance policy she had found in Daniel's desk, documents that named him as the sole beneficiary. Harris studied the photos, his expression tightening. This raises questions, but it may not be enough on its own. At that moment, Sophie tugged on her mother's sleeve. With surprising composure, she spoke softly but firmly. "Daddy said if Mommy was gone, everything would be his. He said it on the phone to Grandma Evelyn. And he said it should look like an accident." The officers exchanged glances. Harris looked at Sophie, his tone gentle. "When did you hear that?" "3 days ago, outside Daddy's study," she answered. "He was looking at house plans and told someone the security system was ready." Hours later, investigators confirmed what Caroline and Sophie had described. Residue of gasoline was found around the property, poured deliberately at key points. Even more damning, the security system had been tampered with, allowing the windows and doors to be locked remotely. What had seemed like a frantic claim from a desperate wife was quickly becoming a credible case of attempted murder. Detectives began searching for Daniel. His supposed business trip unraveled immediately. Co-workers at his investment firm testified that no meeting had been scheduled. Within a day, police located him at a gas station along the interstate. In his trunk, they found a large stash of cash, falsified identity papers, and a burner phone. Daniel was arrested on the spot. During interrogation, he shouted, "I'm innocent. This was all my mother's idea. She pushed me into it." When Evelyn Miller was taken in, her polished facade cracked. At first, she insisted she knew nothing, but when confronted with Daniel's accusations, her composure broke. "That ungrateful boy," she spat. "I sacrificed everything for him. I only wanted what was best." As investigators pressed her, the disturbing truth unfolded. Together, mother and son had orchestrated the plan to eliminate Caroline and Sophie, seize Caroline's inheritance, and cover it as a tragic household fire. The financial motive was undeniable. Records showed that Daniel was drowning in debt, his image of success nothing but a performance. He had been funneling money into failed ventures and supporting a mistress in another city. Evelyn, blinded by devotion to her son, believed removing Caroline would free him to start fresh. The discovery sent a chill down Caroline's spine. What she had sensed in Daniel's eyes, what Sophie had overheard in whispers, was now carved into hard evidence. As dawn broke over the smoldering remains of the Miller home, Caroline sat in the back of a patrol car with Sophie in her lap. She stared through the window, still in shock. The place that once held laughter, morning breakfasts, and childhood dreams had been reduced to ashes by the very man who had sworn to protect them. Yet amid the ruin, there was one undeniable truth: they had survived. And now the truth about Daniel and Evelyn was finally coming to light. 3 months later, the courthouse in Portland became the stage where every hidden truth was forced into daylight. Caroline sat on the wooden bench, her hands clasped tightly together. Beside her, Sophie swung her legs nervously but kept her chin high. The courtroom buzzed with reporters, neighbors, and curious onlookers. Everyone wanted to hear how a respected businessman and his elegant mother could be accused of such a crime. The prosecution laid out the evidence piece by piece. Photographs of the tampered security system. Reports confirming gasoline had been poured strategically throughout the Miller home. Phone records showing repeated calls between Daniel and Evelyn during the weeks leading up to the fire. The prosecutor spoke with measured clarity. The defendant, Daniel Miller, intended to murder his wife and daughter in order to claim her inheritance. This was not a crime of passion. This was calculated, deliberate, and cold. Daniel's defense attorney tried to shift the blame. At first, they argued that Daniel's mental state had deteriorated under financial pressure. When that failed to gain sympathy, Daniel turned against his mother. "She manipulated me," he declared from the stand. "Evelyn Miller has always controlled my life. This was her plan, not mine." The courtroom stirred, but Evelyn's reaction silenced the room. Rising to her feet, her voice cracked with fury. "Do not dare put this on me, Daniel. I did everything for you. I carried out your wishes because I thought you deserved better than her." Her confession shocked even her own attorney. But the most unforgettable moment came when Sophie was called to testify. The 6-year-old walked to the witness stand, holding her stuffed rabbit. The bailiff swore her in gently, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Sophie's voice was small but steady. She told the jury how she had overheard her father on the phone with her grandmother. She repeated his words, "If Caroline is gone, everything will be mine. We just need to make it look like an accident." She described the old house plans her father had studied and how she had found the hidden passage because her grandmother, Caroline's late mother, had told her in a dream. The prosecutor asked softly, "Sophie, when you say grandma, which one do you mean?" Sophie pointed at Caroline. "Mommy's mommy. She warned me about Daddy's plan." A quiet murmur spread through the courtroom. It was not evidence in the traditional sense, but it was the kind of truth only a child could carry, clear, fearless, and impossible to ignore. When Sophie stepped down, tears filled Caroline's eyes. She knew her daughter's courage had carried more weight than any document. In the end, the jury returned guilty verdicts for both Daniel and Evelyn. Daniel was sentenced to 15 years in prison for attempted murder and arson. Evelyn received 8 years for conspiracy. Justice, though painful, had been served. 6 months later, autumn leaves drifted across the yard of a small cottage on the edge of Portland. The home was modest compared to the Miller family's old estate, but for Caroline and Sophie, it was a sanctuary. Warm light spilled from the windows each evening, and the scent of apple pie often lingered in the kitchen. What mattered was not size or grandeur, but safety and peace. Caroline had returned to her work at the museum, slowly regaining her rhythm. Her new project, a foundation to support young female artists, had taken root. She named it the Second Light Foundation, a tribute to the idea that life could offer another chance to shine after darkness. Part of her inheritance funded it, transforming what had once been a source of tension into a tool for hope. When she explained the name to Sophie, the little girl nodded proudly. "It means we can start again," she said. Sophie had also begun to heal. With the help of Dr. Michael Hayes, a gentle and patient child psychologist, she learned to talk about her fears instead of carrying them in silence. She made friends at school, filled sketchbooks with colorful drawings, and even had one chosen for a student art exhibition. On the paper she had drawn 3 figures: herself, her mother, and her grandmother. Caroline framed it and hung it in the hallway. One evening, as snow threatened at the horizon, Michael joined them for dinner. He had become more than a counselor. He was a steady presence, someone who had quietly stepped into their lives with kindness. After the meal, Sophie leaned against her mother's arm and asked, "Mommy, what is a real family?" Caroline thought for a moment before answering. "It is not about blood alone. It is about people who care for each other, protect each other, and want each other to be free." Sophie smiled, her eyes thoughtful. She glanced at Michael and added, "Then maybe he is family too." The 3 of them shared a quiet laugh, the sound blending with the crackle of the fireplace. For the first time in a long while, Caroline felt the warmth of a true beginning. On Christmas Eve, snowflakes drifted gently past the windows, settling on the quiet street outside. Caroline and Sophie sat together by the fire, the warmth of the flames wrapping around them. The old fears had not vanished completely, but the air now carried a sense of peace rather than dread. Sophie leaned against her mother's shoulder, clutching the same stuffed rabbit that had traveled with her through fire and fear. Caroline kissed the top of her head. "Your courage saved us, Sophie. You gave us a new life." Sophie looked up, her voice soft but certain. "We saved each other, Mommy. And Grandma helped too." Caroline smiled, her eyes glistening. Perhaps her mother's love really had lingered beyond the grave, guiding them through the darkest night. Perhaps it was simply the power of memory. Either way, Caroline believed it had carried them when she had nearly lost all strength. As the fire crackled, Caroline reflected on what had unfolded. She had learned that trust is not blind, and family is not defined by blood alone. True family is found in the people who stand with you in your most fragile moments, who protect rather than betray, who heal rather than harm. It is in a daughter's courage, in a friend's steady hand, in the quiet promise of a safer tomorrow. To everyone listening, hold close those who love you honestly, and do not ignore the quiet instincts that whisper when something feels wrong. They may save your life. If this story touched you, please like this video, share it with someone who may need to hear it, and comment your thoughts below. And do not forget to subscribe to The Art of Revenge for more stories of resilience, betrayal, and the strength to begin again. Your support helps keep these voices alive, reminding us all that even in darkness there can be a second light.